In the very heart of Rome, within the tiny state of Vatican City, for 93 years now, a voice has resounded that is heard throughout the world. Vatican Radio is a unique phenomenon in the global media space, where the spiritual and informational intertwine in a special way. Founded in 1931 with the direct participation of radio inventor Guglielmo Marconi and Pope Pius XI, it became the first international voice of the Holy See. Today, it is not just a radio station, but an entire media empire, broadcasting in more than 40 languages worldwide. But why did the Church need its own airwaves? What lies behind the waves carrying papal messages to the most distant corners of the planet? What secrets do the studios hold, from which masses and pontifical addresses are broadcast? Vatican Radio is not only religious programs and sermons, it is a complex media organism reflecting the multifaceted mission of the Catholic Church in the modern world. From evangelization to diplomacy, from cultural enlightenment to news broadcasting. The 1930s. The world was poised in an unstable equilibrium between two world wars. Europe was experiencing the rise of totalitarian regimes. It was during this anxious period that the Vatican decided to find its own voice, capable of transcending borders and ideological barriers. On February 12, 1931, a historic event occurred. Pope Pius XI addressed the world for the first time via radio waves. "Hear, O heavens, what I say. Hear, O earth, the words from my mouth." With these words from Holy Scripture, the pontiff began the first papal radio broadcast in history. A truly revolutionary moment. For the first time, the voice of the head of the Catholic Church sounded simultaneously for the whole world, overcoming distances at the speed of light. The technical side of this breakthrough was handled by none other than the inventor of radio himself, Guglielmo Marconi. An amazing collaboration of science and faith, technical progress and ancient traditions. Marconi personally supervised the construction of the transmitting station on the grounds of the Vatican Gardens. For him, it was not just a technical project. Being a Catholic, he considered the creation of the papal radio station a matter of special importance. Pope Pius XI himself perfectly understood the significance of this new means of communication. In an era when totalitarian regimes were beginning to control information flows, the independent voice of the Vatican became a critically important tool. The Church needed a direct channel of communication with the faithful around the world, especially in countries where Catholics were persecuted. The original studio was modest, just a few rooms with basic equipment. But the technical characteristics of the transmitter developed by Marconi were impressive. A power of 60 kilowatts allowed the signal to travel vast distances. The first broadcasts were conducted in Latin, the universal language of the Catholic Church, but very quickly the station began to expand its linguistic range. Italian, French, English, German, Spanish. The Vatican sought to speak to each nation in its native language. The political context of the radio station's founding cannot be underestimated. 1931, a time when fascism had already taken root in Italy. Nazism was gaining strength in Germany, and the communist regime in the USSR was conducting anti-religious campaigns. Pope Pius XI, a diplomat and intellectual, realized the approaching danger and sought to create an informational counterbalance to the propaganda of totalitarian regimes. The initial broadcasting goals were ambitious: disseminating Catholic doctrine, informing about the activities of the Holy See, protecting religious freedom, and providing an independent source of news. The radio station was immediately positioned not just as a religious mouthpiece, but as a voice of moral authority in a world plunging into the chaos of ideological conflicts. Behind the modest walls of the Vatican lies a true technological marvel. A radio station whose technical evolution mirrors nearly a century of broadcasting history. The first transmitter, installed by Guglielmo Marconi in 1931, was for its time the pinnacle of engineering thought. A powerful 60-kilowatt shortwave transmitter was housed in a specially constructed building in the Vatican Gardens. The equipment of the first studio appeared almost primitive by modern standards. A few microphones, a simple mixing console, and tube amplifiers. But even with such equipment, the radio station could deliver the papal word to the most remote corners of the planet. The 40s brought the first serious modernization. Amidst World War II, when radio's role as a source of information became critically important, the Vatican invested in new transmitters and antennas. Particularly significant was the establishment in 1957 of a powerful transmitting center in Santa Maria de Galleria, 20 kilometers from Rome. This technical complex, spanning 440 hectares, became the heart of the Vatican's broadcasting infrastructure. Its antenna fields, with dozens of masts up to 100 meters high, became a characteristic part of the Roman provincial landscape. The 60s and 70s were marked by the transition to transistor technologies. Studio equipment became increasingly sophisticated, with multi-channel mixing consoles, studio-quality tape recorders, and professional microphones appearing. During this time, a unique multilingual broadcasting infrastructure was formed. Specialized studios were created for each language editorial team. The 80s saw a true technological breakthrough when Vatican Radio began using satellite communication for signal retransmission. This significantly improved reception quality in remote regions and circumvented the problem of signal jamming in countries of the socialist bloc. In 1986, a complete modernization of the studio complex was carried out. New generation analog equipment with computer control elevated program production to a new level of quality. The 90s brought the digital revolution. Magnetic tapes and vinyl records gave way to digital media, and computer editing and broadcasting systems emerged. Vatican Radio was among the first in Europe to implement a fully digital production process. On February 21, 1996, a landmark event occurred. The official website of the radio station was launched, marking the beginning of the Internet era in the history of Vatican media. The 2000s became a time of fundamental changes in technical infrastructure. In 2005, the Vatican gradually began to reduce traditional shortwave broadcasting, focusing instead on FM transmissions, satellite radio, and Internet streaming. This decision was dictated by both economic considerations and changing audience habits. The powerful transmitters in Santa Maria de Galleria, which had served as the main tool for global broadcasting for decades, were gradually decommissioned. In 2009, the first Vatican Radio podcasts appeared, and mobile applications were soon launched. Technical evolution continues today. Modern Vatican Radio studios are equipped with state-of-the-art technology, digital mixing consoles, computer broadcasting automation systems, professional audio and video equipment. For today's radio is no longer just sound, but also visual content for social networks, streaming platforms, and video hosting services. Vatican Radio can safely be called a linguistic universe in miniature. More than 40 languages are broadcast on this unique station, making it one of the most multilingual media outlets in the world. Just imagine, from Swahili to Vietnamese, from Arabic to Ukrainian, papal messages overcome not only geographical but also linguistic barriers, reaching believers in their native tongues. This impressive linguistic mosaic was formed gradually, reflecting the global nature of the Catholic Church and its missionary priorities. The first foreign language broadcast was in French, just a few days after the station opened in 1931. Soon, English, German, Spanish, and Portuguese were added, languages of countries with large Catholic populations. Polish broadcasting began in 1938, on the eve of World War II, which proved to be a prophetic decision. These broadcasts soon became a vital channel of communication with occupied Poland. The Russian service appeared in the midst of the Cold War, in 1948, becoming one of the few independent sources of information for Catholics in the Soviet Union. The Second Vatican Council in the 60s gave a special impetus to multilingual broadcasting, proclaiming the Church's openness to the world and dialogue with various cultures. The number of language departments began to grow rapidly, including languages from Asia and Africa. The Chinese service, which began operating in 1954, became a bridge to millions of Catholics in a country where religious freedom was severely restricted. The Vietnamese department appeared in 1957, Amharic, for Ethiopia, in the 60s. Native speakers work in each language department, often in cooperation with Italian colleagues. This creates a unique multicultural environment where dozens of nationalities interact daily. The corridors of the Palace of Pius in the Vatican, where the studios are located, resemble a miniature United Nations. Here you can hear conversations in dozens of languages, see traditional costumes of different peoples, and smell the aromas of national cuisines during lunch breaks. The process of translating papal messages is a true art. Each language department does not simply translate the pontiff's words, but adapts them to the cultural characteristics of its audience. Metaphors, biblical allusions, theological concepts, all this requires subtle cultural adaptation. For example, in African languages, local proverbs and images familiar to listeners are used, and in Asian broadcasts, the peculiarities of Eastern thought and religious traditions are taken into account. Behind the strict facade of Vatican Radio lies an amazing world where hundreds of people daily create programs broadcast on all continents. The organizational structure of this media giant resembles a well-oiled machine, where each link performs its indispensable function. The radio station is headed by a director, appointed directly by the Pope. Historically, this position has been held by representatives of the Jesuit order, the intellectual elite of the Catholic Church. Under the director's leadership, an administrative council works, including both clergy and secular specialists in media and communications. The editorial structure of Vatican Radio is built on two principles: linguistic and thematic. Language departments are responsible for creating content in specific languages, adapting general materials to the cultural characteristics of their audience. Thematic departments are engaged in producing programs of a specific focus, from liturgical broadcasts to news releases and cultural programs. Who creates the papal radio station's broadcasts? The team is a unique combination of clergy and laity, professional journalists, and theologians. The staff includes about 400 people of more than 30 nationalities. Among them are Jesuit priests with doctorates in theology, former foreign correspondents for leading global media, professional translators, and technical specialists. The daily life of the radio station begins early in the morning with editorial meetings. At 7:30, the news service gathers to discuss the main events of the day and assign tasks. Special attention is paid to the activities of the Pope and the Holy See, international events with ethical and religious dimensions, and the situation of Catholics in various countries around the world. After the meeting, journalists begin their work. Some go to cover events, others prepare studio programs, and still others are engaged in editing and translating materials. The program creation process is strictly regulated. A concept is developed for each broadcast and approved by the editorial board. Then a script is written, undergoing several levels of review, from stylistic to theological. Materials touching upon matters of doctrine and the official position of the Church on controversial issues are checked particularly carefully. At the same time, Vatican Radio journalists have significant freedom in choosing topics and approaches to covering them. The station strives to meet the high professional standards of modern journalism, while remaining faithful to its mission. Editorial decisions are made collegially, with the participation of both clergy and lay employees. Interestingly, at the radio station there is a practice of joint prayer before the start of the working day, but participation in it is not mandatory for non-Christian employees. This balance between religious mission and a professional approach to media production creates a unique working atmosphere where faith and journalism coexist in harmonious unity. What then is broadcast on Vatican Radio? The program schedule of this unique radio station represents a carefully constructed balance between spiritual and secular content, reflecting the multifaceted mission of the Catholic Church in the modern world. Daily broadcasting begins with morning liturgical programs. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Roman time, Mass is broadcast from the chapel of the Domus Sanctae Marthae, where Pope Francis resides. This broadcast is the heart of the on-air policy, a kind of spiritual tuning fork that sets the tone for the entire day. Mass is broadcast in Latin with simultaneous translation into the main broadcasting languages. The morning block continues with programs of spiritual reflection and catechesis. Short, 15-minute broadcasts dedicated to the interpretation of Holy Scripture and the fundamentals of the Catholic faith. It is noteworthy that these programs are created taking into account the cultural characteristics of different regions. For the African audience, local parables and musical elements are used. For the Asian audience, approaches that take into account dialogue with Eastern religions. News reports occupy a special place in the broadcasting schedule. Every hour, 5-minute summaries of world news are aired. A distinctive feature of Vatican Radio's news service is its particular focus. Alongside political events, issues of social justice, religious freedom, ecology, the protection of human life and dignity are covered in detail. The flagship informational program, World and Events, airs 3 times a day and is a 30-minute overview of major events with expert commentary and interviews. Cultural and educational programs make up about 40% of the airtime. Among them, the series History and Faith enjoys particular popularity, a program that explores the interconnectedness of religion and culture of different peoples. Musical Box introduces listeners to the treasures of classical and spiritual music, and literary readings offer works by both recognized classics and contemporary Catholic authors. The educational block includes programs on bioethics, the social doctrine of the Church, and interreligious dialogue. Particularly interesting is the program Science and Faith, where the latest scientific discoveries are discussed in light of the Catholic worldview. This program reflects the contemporary position of the Church, which recognizes the value of scientific knowledge and strives for dialogue between faith and reason. An important part of the on-air policy is the coverage of interreligious dialogue. The weekly program Bridges is dedicated to interaction with other Christian denominations, Judaism, Islam, and Eastern religions. It features interviews with leaders of different religious communities, and joint initiatives and projects are discussed. The specificity of information presentation on Vatican Radio is determined by several principles. Firstly, it is the pursuit of objectivity and credibility, characteristic of quality journalism. Secondly, it is the constant correlation of events with the values of the Gospel and the social doctrine of the Church. Thirdly, it is a positive orientation, an emphasis on constructive solutions to problems rather than on criticism or condemnation. The balance of religious and secular content is the result of a long evolution. While in the first decades of the station's existence, purely religious content predominated, today's airtime reflects a wide range of interests and needs of the modern audience. At the same time, even secular topics are considered through the prism of Christian values, which creates the unique editorial style of Vatican Radio. At the heart of all Vatican Radio's media ministry stands the figure of the Holy Father. Broadcasts of papal addresses are not just a part of the program schedule, but the very essence of this unique media's existence. Every Sunday at noon Roman time, St. Peter's Square fills with faithful, and radio waves carry the pontiff's blessing, Urbi et Orbi, to the city and the world, across all continents. The Angelus prayer and the papal address are broadcast live in over 40 languages, allowing millions of Catholics worldwide to feel a spiritual unity with the Holy See. Preparations for such broadcasts begin long before noon. From early morning, technical crews check every element of the complex system: microphones, communication lines, transmitters. Translators receive the texts of papal addresses in advance to prepare for simultaneous translation. Directors and sound engineers gather in a special control room. Everything must work flawlessly, for this is not just a radio broadcast, but a crucial element of the papal ministry. The history of papal radio addresses began with Pius XII, who reigned from 1939 to 1958. It was he who transformed radio addresses into a regular practice and a vital tool of his pontificate. During World War II, his Christmas messages, broadcast by Vatican Radio, became events of global scale. The Pope used the airwaves to appeal for peace, condemn war crimes, and express solidarity with the victims of the conflict. The style of papal addresses changed significantly with each pontificate. Pius XII spoke solemnly and formally, often using Latin and complex theological constructions. John XXIII, who initiated the Second Vatican Council, brought simplicity and warmth to the airwaves, addressing listeners as a good shepherd to his flock. His famous address at the opening of the council, where he spoke of a new Pentecost and the renewal of the Church, was broadcast by Vatican Radio in an unprecedented number of languages. Paul VI, who continued the council's reforms, made radio addresses more dialogical and contemporary. He was the first to address pressing social issues: poverty, injustice, the threat of nuclear war. John Paul II, the Pilgrim Pontiff, used radio as a global platform. His charisma and acting talent were perfectly suited for this medium. The multilingual Pope often greeted listeners in their native languages, creating a special closeness between the pontiff and faithful worldwide. Benedict XVI, a theologian and intellectual, brought the depth of theological thought to the airwaves. His speeches were distinguished by logical coherence and philosophical depth. Under him, Vatican Radio began actively using internet broadcasts and podcasts, making papal addresses available in digital format. Pope Francis revolutionized the style of papal addresses. His simple, conversational language, the use of metaphors from everyday life, the ability to speak about complex theological truths in understandable words, all of this made his radio addresses extraordinarily popular even among non-religious audiences. He often deviates from the prepared text, adding personal reflections and memories, which makes each broadcast unique. A special event in the Vatican Radio calendar is the broadcast of the Pope's Christmas message, Urbi et Orbi. On this day, all language departments work at full capacity, ensuring the translation of the Pope's words for the entire world. The broadcast begins with a solemn announcement in Latin, followed by the blessing and address of the pontiff, which traditionally touches upon the most pressing issues of our time and expresses hope for peace and justice. When the clouds of World War II gathered over Europe, Vatican Radio found itself in a unique position. In a world divided by front lines and iron curtains of propaganda, the voice of the tiny state became one of the few independent sources of information. From the first days of the conflict, the station's leadership realized its special mission, not just to inform, but to save lives. One of the most striking examples of this work was the service for finding missing persons. Starting in 1940, Vatican Radio began broadcasting the names of prisoners of war and displaced persons. These lists, read slowly and clearly by the announcer, gave hope to thousands of families who had lost contact with their loved ones. Every evening, at the same time, the airwaves filled with names and short messages. Josef Müller from Munich informs his family that he is in a POW camp in England and is well. These broadcasts were listened to all over Europe, often secretly, under threat of punishment. For many, it was the only way to learn about the fate of their relatives. A special place in the station's history is occupied by secret messages transmitted in encrypted form. During the Nazi occupation of Italy, Vatican Radio used a special language of hints and allegories, understood only by the initiated. Thus, the phrase, "white flowers bloomed in the garden," could mean a successful operation to rescue Jewish families. Such messages were transmitted to underground resistance groups and saved many lives. The radio station's territory itself became a refuge for the persecuted. In the basements of the transmitting center's technical facilities, dozens of refugees, including Jews and political dissidents, hid at various times. The technical staff, risking their lives, provided them with safety and basic necessities. Pope Pius XII used the airwaves for diplomatic maneuvers in the most difficult conditions of the war. His Christmas addresses were carefully analyzed by all warring parties. When in 1942 the pontiff spoke of "peoples threatened with extermination," everyone understood that he was referring to Jews, although they were not directly mentioned. Such diplomatic caution allowed the Vatican to maintain channels of communication with all sides of the conflict. After the war, a new era of trials began, the Cold War. Vatican Radio became one of the few sources of independent information for believers behind the Iron Curtain. In the countries of the Socialist bloc, the station's signal was regularly jammed, and listening to broadcasts could lead to serious consequences. Nevertheless, millions of people risked tuning their receivers to the Vatican wave. For Catholics in Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Lithuania, these broadcasts were not just a source of news, but also spiritual support. Vatican Radio played a special role during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Pope John XXIII used the airwaves to appeal for peace, which was heard by the leaders of the superpowers. His address, "To all people of goodwill," was broadcast at a time when the world was on the brink of nuclear catastrophe. Many historians believe that this speech played a certain role in de-escalating the conflict. In the 70s and 80s, the station actively covered violations of religious freedoms in Eastern Bloc countries. Stories of persecuted believers, secret masses, and underground seminaries reached the world public precisely through Vatican Radio. When the Solidarity movement emerged in Poland, the station became an important channel of informational support for Polish Catholics. The election of Polish Cardinal Karol Wojtyła as Pope John Paul II in 1978 gave special significance to broadcasts in Polish. His first words on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, transmitted by Vatican Radio, caused a wave of enthusiasm in Poland, becoming a catalyst for change. During the wars and humanitarian crises of the late 20th century, in Rwanda, the Balkans, Iraq, Vatican Radio continued its mission as an independent voice, calling for peace and the protection of human dignity. The station not only informed about events, but also coordinated the humanitarian efforts of Catholic organizations in conflict zones. In the era of information wars and fake news, the role of Vatican Radio as a source of reliable information takes on new meaning. Fidelity to facts, ethical principles, and human values becomes the foundation that allows this unique media to maintain the trust of listeners around the world. When the Cold War divided the world into two opposing camps, Vatican Radio became one of the few voices capable of penetrating the Iron Curtain. For millions of Catholics in the Socialist bloc countries, these broadcasts were not just a source of information, but a true spiritual salvation. Broadcasting to the territory of the Soviet Union began in 1948, at the height of Stalin's repressions against religious communities. The first programs in Russian were prepared by a small group of emigrants and priests of the Eastern Rite. They aired 3 times a week for 30 minutes. Soviet authorities immediately reacted to the emergence of a new ideological adversary. Special jamming stations were installed throughout the country, creating interference on Vatican radio frequencies. These devices, consuming an enormous amount of electricity, operated around the clock, drowning out the signal with white noise or the broadcast of extraneous sounds. Jamming was particularly intense during important religious holidays and papal addresses. Despite technical obstacles, thousands of Soviet citizens found ways to listen to the forbidden broadcasts. Radio amateurs constructed special receivers capable of picking up the signal through interference. Others tuned into broadcasts late at night, when the intensity of jamming sometimes decreased. In Lithuania, Latvia, Western Ukraine, and Belarus, where Catholic traditions were particularly strong, entire communities of underground listeners formed. They gathered in private homes, tightly draped the windows, and took turns standing guard outside, warning of danger. For these people, the voice from the Vatican was a thread connecting them to the global church and a long-standing tradition. Maria Kowalska from Vilnius recalls, "We listened to the broadcasts every Sunday, recorded them on a tape recorder, and then distributed the recordings among acquaintances. It was dangerous. One could get a prison sentence for possessing such recordings. But for us, it was the only way to hear a real Mass, to learn about the life of the Church in the free world." Vatican Radio played a special role during the pontificate of John Paul II. His election in 1978 was a sensation for Catholics of the socialist bloc. For the first time in 450 years, the Pope was from Eastern Europe. Broadcasts of his speeches in Polish had a huge impact on the situation in Poland, supporting the solidarity movement and contributing to peaceful changes. The content of the broadcasts for the socialist bloc countries was carefully thought out. In addition to religious programs, broadcasts of services, catechism, lives of saints, educational programs occupied a significant place. Listeners could study church history, philosophy, biblical studies, those areas of knowledge that were inaccessible or distorted in official Soviet education. A special focus was programs about the persecuted church. Vatican Radio reported on the fates of priests in camps, destroyed churches, and underground religious communities. These broadcasts not only informed the Western public, but also provided moral support to the believers themselves behind the Iron Curtain, showing that their suffering was known to the world and that they were not forgotten. With the beginning of perestroika and glasnost in the second half of the 80s, the intensity of jamming gradually decreased, and in 1988, it was completely stopped. This coincided with the celebration of the millennium of the baptism of Rus, a turning point in the relations between the state and the church in the USSR. A new stage began for Vatican Radio. Now broadcasts could freely reach their audience, and journalists gained the opportunity to work directly on the territory of the former Soviet Union. Vatican journalism is a unique concept. In a world where news feeds are overflowing with sensations, scandals, and screaming headlines, the Vatican Radio news service follows its own path. Here, journalistic standards and ethical principles are at play, having been formed over decades and reflecting the unique position of this media at the intersection of the secular information flow and the spiritual mission of the Church. At the core of its editorial policy lies the principle of truth in love, a concept formulated by Pope Pius XII. This means a commitment to factual accuracy, while simultaneously respecting the dignity of every person discussed in the material. We strive for objectivity, but not neutrality, explains Andrea Tognelli, editorial director of Vatican News. Neutrality implies an absence of a value position. We, however, always view events through the lens of evangelical values, which does not prevent us from being objective in presenting facts. It is interesting to compare Vatican Radio's approach with that of secular media. Unlike commercial media, there is no pursuit of sensations and ratings here. The news service can afford to focus on topics that rarely make headlines in global news agencies. The situation of Christian communities in conflict zones, the Church's social projects, dialogue between religions. When covering controversial topics, Vatican Radio journalists follow the principle of understanding, not condemning. For example, when covering the migration crisis in Europe, the station consistently advocates for the dignity of refugees, but also gives a voice to those who express concern about the scale of migration. The goal is not to impose a ready-made solution, but to present the problem in light of Catholic social teaching on solidarity and subsidiarity. A special approach is also evident in the coverage of political conflicts. During the wars in Iraq, Syria, and Ukraine, Vatican Radio invariably emphasized the human dimension of the tragedy, avoiding unambiguous political assessments. Our task is to be a voice of peace amidst the cacophony of war, explains Serafine Camodeka, a journalist for the African Service. A fundamental position of the news service is to give a voice to victims and marginalized groups. Regular reports from slums, refugee camps, prisons, and environmental disaster zones represent unique content rarely found in mainstream media. At the same time, the materials never descend into emotional manipulation or poverty pornography, the exploitation of human suffering to attract attention. Interestingly, despite its affiliation with the Catholic Church, Vatican Radio does not shy away from covering internal church problems. Scandals related to clerical sexual abuse, financial irregularities, theological disputes. All these topics are reflected on air, albeit with a certain restraint. We do not seek to air dirty laundry in public, says Vatican journalist Silvina Perez, but we also do not bury our heads in the sand. Our audience deserves an honest conversation about the Church's problems. The approach to covering bioethical issues, abortion, euthanasia, surrogacy, genetic research, is illustrative. While the Church's position is unequivocal here, journalists strive to present it not in the form of dogmatic statements, but through stories of real people, expert opinions, and scientific data. This creates a deeper and more nuanced conversation than simply proclaiming moral prohibitions. Working in the Vatican Radio news service requires a special professional profile. Journalists must combine modern multimedia journalism skills with a deep knowledge of Catholic doctrine, church history, and religious studies. Many employees hold degrees in both journalism and theology, or religious studies. The missionary role of Vatican Radio has undergone a significant transformation over its 90-plus years of existence. While in its early decades, the station functioned as a direct evangelizer, openly preaching Catholic doctrine and calling for conversion. Today, its approach has become much more subtle and dialogical. The modern understanding of its mission reflects the changes that have occurred within the Catholic Church since the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, when the Church proclaimed openness to the world and dialogue with different cultures and religions. Federico Lombardi, Director of International Programs at Vatican Radio, describes this evolution as follows. We have moved from a broadcasting model where the Church simply proclaimed the truth to a communication model where we strive for genuine dialogue. This does not mean abandoning the evangelizing mission, but its implementation has taken on new forms. Instead of straightforward preaching, it now offers a testament to Christian values through coverage of events, cultural programs, and interreligious dialogue. This strategy is particularly evident in broadcasts for countries where Christians are a minority. In Arabic-language broadcasts for the Middle East and North Africa, the emphasis is placed on universal human values, common to both Christians and Muslims: peace, justice, family values, and care for the poor. At the same time, the broadcasts do not conceal their Christian identity, but present it in a format that respects the cultural context of the audience. A similar approach is applied in programs for India, where broadcasts in Hindi, Tamil, Malayalam, and other languages take into account the diverse religious environment of the subcontinent. Vatican Radio seeks to find common ground between Christian teachings and the spiritual traditions of Hinduism, Jainism, and Sikhism. The program Spiritual Bridges presents a dialogue between representatives of different religions on current ethical and social issues. In countries with a predominantly Buddhist population, Thailand, Vietnam, Myanmar, the radio station emphasizes values common to Christianity and Buddhism: compassion, nonviolence, and spiritual seeking. Evangelization, in this context, does not occur through contrasting religions, but through demonstrating how Christianity can enrich local spiritual traditions. A special case is broadcasting to China, where religious activity is strictly regulated by the state. Here, Vatican Radio balances its missionary task with the need not to harm local Catholics. Chinese language programs combine cultural and educational content with a cautious presentation of Catholic doctrine and information about the life of the Universal Church. Notably, the missionary role of the radio is not limited to countries with a non-Christian majority. In secularized Europe and North America, the station performs the function of new evangelization, reaching out to those who formerly belong to Christian culture but have lost a living connection with faith. Here, the strategy is built on intellectual dialogue with contemporary culture, discussing bioethical issues, environmental problems, and social justice. The balance between preaching and dialogue is a constant search, reflecting the evolution of the Church itself in the modern world. If previously the success of missionary activity was measured by the number of conversions, today the criteria have become more subtle, creating a space for the encounter of different worldviews, bearing witness to the values of the gospel through concrete actions, and fostering a culture of dialogue. At the dawn of the 21st century, Vatican Radio faced an unprecedented challenge: the digital revolution, which transformed the very nature of media consumption. Traditional radio waves gradually gave way to internet technologies, and the habit of listening to a radio receiver at a specific time was replaced by the desire to receive content on demand, in a convenient format and on any device. For a radio station with a long history and established traditions, this meant the need for a fundamental transformation. The first step into the digital era was the launch of an official website in 1996. This event, modestly noted in the Vatican Chronicles, in fact, marked the beginning of a new era. The site initially offered only basic information about the radio station and program schedule, but within a year, it featured audio files and text transcripts of key programs. The real breakthrough occurred in 2000, when the live internet broadcasting system became operational. Now, listeners worldwide could tune into Vatican Radio without a physical radio receiver. All they needed was a computer with an internet connection. This became especially important for Catholics in countries where the traditional radio signal was unavailable or jammed. In the mid-2000s, an archive of papal speeches, liturgical services, and key programs appeared on the website. This created a unique digital library of Catholic audio content, accessible to researchers, journalists, and ordinary believers. The next logical step was the launch of podcasts in 2007. Vatican Radio was one of the first among religious media to realize the potential of this format. Podcasts allowed listeners to download programs and listen to them at their convenience, which was especially valued by a younger audience. Initially, podcasts were launched in 5 main languages: Italian, English, French, Spanish, and German. But soon their number expanded to 20. The mobile era posed new challenges for the radio station. In 2010, the first official smartphone application was launched, allowing users to listen to live broadcasts and podcasts, and also receive push notifications about important events in the life of the Church. The application quickly became popular, especially during significant church events. For example, during the 2013 conclave that elected Pope Francis, It was downloaded by over 1 million users. Social networks became the next front of the Vatican's digital expansion. Official Vatican Radio accounts appeared on Facebook, Twitter, now X, Instagram, and later on YouTube. Each platform required its own strategy and content format. For Twitter, these were brief news updates and quotes from the pontiff's speeches. For Instagram, visual stories from the life of the Church. For YouTube, video recordings of key events and programs. It is noteworthy that Pope Francis personally supported this digital transformation, regularly mentioning the importance of the Church's presence in the digital space. The Internet can offer greater possibilities for encounter and solidarity between all. And this is a good thing. It is a gift from God, the pontiff stated in one of his messages. Technological updates also affected production processes. Traditional studios with analog equipment were gradually replaced by digital complexes. Journalists mastered multimedia production skills. Now they had to not only prepare audio materials, but also create accompanying textual and visual content. The coronavirus pandemic in 2020 became an unexpected catalyst for digital transformation. When physical presence at masses and papal audiences became impossible, online broadcasts became the only way for millions of Catholics to participate in religious life. Vatican Technical Services quickly expanded streaming capabilities, and journalists adapted to working remotely. In 2015, Pope Francis initiated the largest media reform in the history of the Vatican. This was not merely an administrative restructuring, but a fundamental rethinking of the role of church media in the digital age. Vatican Radio, which had existed as an independent entity for decades, found itself at the epicenter of these transformations. The reform envisioned the integration of all Holy See media platforms: radio, television, the newspaper, L'Osservatore Romano, the photo service, the publishing house, and social media, into a single system. Thus, the Vatican News Project was born, a multimedia platform uniting all Vatican information resources. For Vatican Radio, this meant the end of an era of autonomous existence and the beginning of a new chapter in its history. Many employees met these changes with apprehension. Giovanna Ciccarelli, who worked in the Italian editorial office for over 20 years, recalls, "We were afraid of losing our identity, of dissolving into the general flow. After all, radio is a special form of communication. We had our own traditions, our own style." However, the reform's leadership emphasized that it was not about abolishing the radio, but about its transformation. Paolo Ruffini, prefect of the Dicastery for Communication, explained, "We are not abandoning radio as a medium. We are integrating it into a broader ecosystem where various formats complement each other." The organizational structure underwent radical changes. Instead of the traditional division into linguistic editorial offices, a matrix system was created. Now, journalists worked not only for a specific language service, but also in thematic departments, producing content for all platforms. Multimedia editorial offices emerged, uniting specialists in audio, video, and text content. Physically, this was expressed in the creation of new workspaces. Instead of isolated studios for each language, open newsrooms appeared where journalists of different specializations worked together. The technological base was also completely updated. Old analog studios gave way to digital multimedia complexes. A unified content management system was implemented, allowing for easy adaptation of materials for various platforms, from traditional radio broadcasts to social networks. The impact of the reform on content proved to be no less significant. If previously each language editorial office worked relatively autonomously, shaping programming policy with due regard for the characteristics of its audience, now a more centralized planning system emerged. Daily editorial meetings began to take place via video conference, bringing together journalists from different language groups. The very nature of the content also changed. traditional half-hour and hour-long programs gradually gave way to shorter formats, adapted for the digital environment. Audio podcasts, video blogs, infographics appeared, formats previously uncharacteristic of classical radio. Special attention was paid to social networks. Every significant piece of material was adapted for distribution via Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. All these changes also affected the audience. On the one hand, there was an outflow of some traditional listeners, accustomed to a certain format and broadcasting style. On the other hand, coverage expanded among young people and users of digital platforms. According to data from the Vatican News Analytical Service, in the first 3 years after the reform, the total audience of Vatican media grew by 30%, while the average age of content consumers decreased from 58 to 42 years. There were also painful decisions. As part of the optimization, shortwave broadcasting in a number of languages was reduced, which caused protests from Catholic communities in remote regions where internet access remains limited. In response to this criticism, a special program to support the digital transition was developed for such communities, including the supply of inexpensive radio receivers with recording capabilities and subsequent content distribution. Today, several years after the start of the reform, its results can be assessed. Vatican Radio has retained its identity, but has become part of a broader media ecosystem. It continues to be the voice of the Pope and the Church in dialogue with the world. But this voice now sounds through many channels and in various formats. For millions of Catholics around the world, this means easier access to church teachings and papal messages. For the Church itself, it means more efficient use of resources and the ability to reach those who no longer tune in to a radio, but check their social media feed daily. Who tunes in to Vatican Radio today? In the era of streaming services, podcasts, and social media, this question sounds particularly pertinent. The audience of the papal radio station in the 21st century represents an astonishing mosaic, uniting traditional listeners and digital natives, Catholics and representatives of other confessions, elderly believers, and curious youth. The demographic portrait of Vatican Radio's modern audience differs significantly from what it was decades ago. According to studies by the Vatican's media service conducted in 2021, the average age of a traditional radio broadcast listener is 62 years old, while the average age of a digital platform user is 37 years old. This reflects a general trend. The older generation remains loyal to the familiar format, while young people prefer to listen to podcasts and follow content on social media. The geographical distribution of the audience has also undergone significant changes. While in the 20th century, the main listeners were Catholics in Europe and Latin America, today there is a significant increase in audience in Africa and Asia. The Philippines, Nigeria, Kenya, India. These countries show the greatest increase in listeners over the past 5 years. This trend is particularly noticeable in the digital space. Vatican Radio's social media accounts in Tagalog, Swahili, and Malayalam show impressive growth dynamics. How does modern man interact with the content of the oldest international radio station? Listening formats are diverse. Traditional radio is still popular in rural areas of Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. In Europe and North America, digital consumption predominates through podcasts, mobile applications, and social media. Many parish priests download weekly papal homilies and play them during Sunday gatherings. A special phenomenon is digital missionaries, as they are called in the Vatican. These are active listeners who not only consume content, but also spread it further, sharing recordings on social media, creating discussion groups, translating materials into local dialects. For example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there is a network of volunteers who record broadcasts on dictaphones and play them in remote villages where there is no electricity or internet. Stories of individual listeners show how significant Vatican Radio's influence can be on people's lives. Maria Luisa from Venezuela recounts, "In the midst of the economic crisis, when many were losing hope, Pope Francis's daily reflections gave me the strength to carry on. I listened to them through the app on my phone on my way to work." Miguel from Mexico, a truck driver covering vast distances on desert roads, shares, "Vatican Radio podcasts are my faithful companions on long journeys. I especially value programs on church history and the lives of saints. It's not only spiritual support, but also an opportunity to learn new things." For Akira from Japan, a university professor and newly converted Catholic, Vatican Radio became a window into the world of the global church. Through broadcasts in Japanese, I was able to feel a connection with Catholics worldwide, to understand the universality of the faith I embraced. What future awaits Vatican Radio in a world where technology is changing at a dizzying pace and secularization is becoming a global trend? This question concerns not only the leadership of the papal media service, but also millions of believers around the world. The Church's airwaves today face a complex set of challenges requiring innovative solutions and strategic vision. The first, and perhaps most significant challenge, is the technological revolution, which is continuously transforming the media landscape. Traditional radio broadcasting is giving way to podcasts, streaming platforms, and social networks. The younger generation hardly uses radio receivers, preferring to consume content via smartphones and tablets. Vatican Radio recognizes this trend and is actively investing in digital formats. "We must be where our audience is," says Massimiliano Menichetti, head of the editorial department at Vatican News. "If young people listen to podcasts and watch short videos on TikTok, we must learn to speak that language without losing the depth of our message." The second serious challenge is secularization, a process that has encompassed not only traditionally Christian Europe, but also many other regions of the world. Declining interest in institutional religion and a growing number of people who do not identify with a specific denomination create a new context for church communication. The radio station is responding to this challenge by expanding the thematic range of its programs. Alongside traditional religious content, there are increasingly more programs dedicated to universal human issues, ecology, social justice, and cultural dialogue. This allows for attracting a wider audience, including those who are on a spiritual quest or do not even consider themselves believers. Globalization and multiculturalism create yet another challenge for the Church's airwaves. In a world where cultures and religions interact intensely, simple preaching is no longer sufficient. Dialogue is needed, taking into account the diversity of worldviews and cultural contexts. Vatican Radio actively develops interreligious dialogue programs, presenting Catholicism not as a closed system, but as an open tradition capable of dialogue with other spiritual paths. This is particularly noticeable in broadcasts for Asia and Africa, where Christianity coexists with ancient religious traditions. The economic challenge also cannot be ignored. Maintaining an international radio station broadcasting in dozens of languages requires significant resources. Amidst overall budget cuts in the Catholic Church, Vatican Radio is forced to seek more effective operating models. Integration with other Vatican media, optimization of production processes, and more flexible use of human resources are all part of the strategy to adapt to new economic realities. At the same time, the station's leadership emphasizes that savings should not come at the expense of content quality or audience reach. So, how is Vatican Radio responding to these challenges? The development strategy includes several key directions. First and foremost is digital transformation. Not just transferring traditional radio content to the internet, but creating fundamentally new formats adapted to the digital environment. A multimedia approach assumes that each story can be told in various formats: audio, video, text, infographics, depending on the platform and target audience. The second direction is content personalization. While traditional radio offered one program for all listeners, digital technologies allow for creating content that takes into account the interests and needs of different groups. Analytical tools help understand which topics and formats are most in demand by different audience segments. The third direction is the development of interactivity and listener engagement. Modern audiences do not want to be passive consumers of information. They seek to participate in dialogue. Vatican Radio actively develops interactive formats, from comments on social media to live broadcasts with the ability to ask questions to an expert or church hierarch. The fourth direction is related to developing a local presence. Instead of a centralized model where all content is created in Rome, more and more material is prepared by local journalists who are well-versed in the context and needs of their audience. This is especially important for broadcasting in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, where the Catholic Church shows the greatest growth. What prospects await the Church's airwaves in the coming decades? Experts predict further integration of Vatican Radio into a single multimedia platform, where the boundaries between different formats will become even more blurred. At the same time, audio content will retain its unique niche, especially in the form of podcasts and personalized audio streams. The development of artificial intelligence technologies opens up new opportunities for content translation and adaptation. Experiments are already underway with automated translation of papal speeches into dozens of languages, followed by human editing. In the future, these technologies will significantly expand the linguistic reach of broadcasting while maintaining high translation quality. Virtual and augmented reality can also find application in church communication. Imagine the possibility of virtually attending a papal mass or making a pilgrimage to holy sites without leaving home. Such technologies can be particularly valuable for believers with limited mobility due to age, health, or political situations. Despite all technological innovations, the essence of Vatican Radio's mission remains unchanged: to be the voice of the Holy See in dialogue with the world, to carry the message of the gospel in all languages and by all available means. As Pope Francis noted, addressing Vatican media staff, technologies change, formats evolve, but our mission remains the same: to bear witness to the good news in the modern world. In this sense, Vatican Radio, despite all challenges and transformations, remains true to its calling: to be a bridge between the Church and the world, between tradition and modernity, between the eternal truths of faith and the changing language of culture. The Church's airwaves continue to resonate amidst the contemporary informational noise, offering not only news and commentary, but also a space for reflection on the eternal questions that have troubled humanity throughout the ages.